Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, we go through the week that was, including the conversation around Pete Alonso's future. We also go down on the farm, as every level of the system is loaded with talent right now. As always, we close out the show answering your mailbag questions. So subscribe to the Mets Pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. This summer, step out of the office and into the iconic with Cadillac, where the Made to Move sales event provides all the inspiration needed to set your email status to away. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac showroom for the Made to Move sales event today. And here's your reminder to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. And Joe, listen, Mets are closing out this season with a lot of guys that were not regulars in this lineup, as we've often talked about. Some guys trying to make their mark for maybe the Mets next year, maybe just to stay around in baseball. So we will get into the week that was, but we also are going to get into the big picture Pete Alonso conversation. But before we do all of that, Joe, I know this time of year nobody's watching the minor leagues more closely than you. Meanwhile, you were at Citi Field on Sunday. You're a busy man in Mets land. How are you?
A lot better than the Los Angeles Angels right now. That I can tell you.
Man. Yeah, just putting all of the players they acquired on waivers is definitely an interesting choice for the Angels. So listen, as bad as things have kind of been, it feels like, for the Mets this year, just remember, they are not the Angels. All right, so let's get into the week that was, Joe. Kind of big picture here. Maybe one thing that's kind of jumping out to you right now, I think to me, watching from afar, is DJ Stewart keeps hitting despite all of this. Francisco Alvarez has dealt with some struggles, which it feels like the Mets are very aware or have an eye on the actual workload he's taken on behind the plate this year, and they want to be very careful of that. We've seen more of Narvaez. We've said before, no matter what, we're not going to hit the panic button on Alvarez, but this season is about watching the young players all along. So I'm personally kind of on wait and see mode right now to see Brett Beatty back up here, but more importantly, Ronny Mauricio get a shot. And until that happens, all eyes are on Alvarez, who basically has to play every other day at this point.
Yeah, I think they're doing workload management there for sure. They're thinking big picture just like we are. They're thinking about 2024. And yes, they want Alvarez to get at bats and get more experience and keep working with pitchers. But I think they're very confident in what Francisco Alvarez is going to be as an offensive player. So they would prefer to let Omar Narvaez get some work and keep Alvarez nice and fresh and don't overload him in his rookie year in a season that obviously is not working out in the Mets' favor. Otherwise, just a dummy sometimes, Connor. I mean, back at leading into the trade deadline, we were told, I was told I was too negative by saying the Mets needed to sell. And now last week I'm like, go ahead, take care of the Braves. And then you got the Angels, just take care of them too. And nope, just kind of back to where it was, and we're back on team, get into the top 6 lottery pick, and that's kind of where we are. And good for DJ Stewart and Jonathan Arauz, who I'm going to say his name every chance I get, Rafael Ortega with the walk-off. But in seriousness, really good stuff from David Peterson and Tylor Megill over the last couple days. And specifically with Peterson, the one thing I want to say is after the game, he's like, I went back to my mechanics from last year where you and I were both very high on him. He pitched well last year. My question is, who told him not to pitch like he pitched last year? Right. I kind of want to get to the bottom of that one, because if he changed back and it worked, I want to know who changed him and why. And Tylor Megill is just such an enigma that I'm not sure what to think about him going forward, because against Texas on Monday, he was back to up to 98 miles an hour, getting swings and misses on curveballs and changeups, and kind of looked like the Tylor Megill again that was good in 2022, unlike the Megill that's been this year. So good signs from those two guys as we look ahead to 2024. How valuable are they as potential starting pitching depth? Because obviously the Mets are going to have to add multiple starters. Or is either shifted into a bullpen role because they need relievers too. They're going to need a lot of pitching. So still a good thing. Like, I'd prefer to see David Peterson and Tylor Megill pitch well. So it was good to see that over the last few days.
It's a great point about learning about your pitching depth, right? I mean, I don't think this is a team that they didn't have much plans for it this year, and I don't think they'll have much plans for it next year of writing these guys' names in ink in the rotation until an injury happens. But Joe, you and I have dealt with this, every single offseason since we've covered the team. When everybody thinks there's not enough spots in the rotation, one or two opens up because of injuries. They just happen in this game, especially to pitchers and especially to the modern day pitcher. So with Megill and Peterson, it's not that you're leaning on them and saying this guy's going to be the number 4, this guy's going to be the number 5, but the number 6, the number 7, the number 8, we always have this conversation, matters a lot. And David Peterson using this time to rebuild his confidence in what sounds like, you said, his mechanics, which is very interesting to me, is really important right now. Megill feels like a guy, unfortunately, and I've been pretty vocal about this on the podcast. He's somebody that as a starter just never works deep enough into games consistently. Yes, the start against Texas, he got through 6 innings, but traditionally Megill is this guy that gives you 4 to 5 innings almost every single start. And those could even be a little bit of a roller coaster. I think the Mets need to have an honest conversation with themselves about the future of Tylor Megill. And that's not me saying to give up on him. I personally would not do that. I think it's what is his role. And you might need to even go back to a year ago, how they used Trevor Williams, and wonder if that's a role that Tylor Megill might be equipped for, right? Maybe he's a guy that he gives you 3 innings in a relief appearance, or he opens a game for you, but he's not going to be relied upon on that scheduled day to work into the 6th and 7th inning like a typical starter hopefully would. So I think this is a good time to experiment and learn a lot about your roster for the guys that are going to be here next year, right? You said it. It's good for DJ Stewart that he's hitting, and if it's not with the Mets next year, he's going to get into a spring training camp and have a shot to be a bench bat for a team. Ortega had a walk-off, right? Like, these are guys that we don't think have huge implications on the 2024 New York Mets. But when you look at young pitching depth, no matter how disappointed you were with Peterson or Megill this year, this evaluation period really, really matters for those guys right now. And I think just as much of it is on the Mets to figure out the best way to set them up for success going into next year, because it feels like maybe they didn't do that this year at times.
Yeah, 100%. I think Peterson was shuttled back and forth between AAA and the bigs. Obviously, some of that was performance related, so that falls on him. But Jeremy Hefner is well regarded as an upper echelon pitching coach, but it just feels like 2023 is just going to be one of those years that we look back on a couple of years from now, hopefully when the Mets are, back on top and doing their thing, where what the heck happened in 2023? Like, it seems like everything that could have gone wrong did, whereas 2022 was everything just went right. It didn't matter how it worked, who got hurt, who did what, like until Starling Marte got hurt kind of in August or whatever. And then that ended up what happened in September and then into the playoffs. Like, it felt like everything just went the Mets way. And this year it feels like absolutely nothing has gone the Mets way except for like Kodai Senga, basically.
All right, so let's get into we've teased this before, the Pete Alonso conversation, right? Pete's name is notable right now for a lot of reasons. One, he's had a mammoth month of August. I mean, as of the 28th, he had hit 9 home runs, 20 RBIs with a 966 OPS in 26 games for the Mets. I mean, just a massive, massive month of August. The Mets did not completely fall out of the race the second half of this season because of Pete Alonso. I mean, yes, he's had his ups and downs, mostly because of injury this season, and the average hasn't been there, but the power numbers are still there yet again for Alonso. But also because, Joe, maybe it's because the team hasn't played very well and they're out of the playoff picture, but this feels like the conversation that can't get away from the Mets. And it started at the trade deadline, where they were rumored by multiple outlets to be at least entertaining the idea of trading a Pete Alonso. I'm not saying they were calling everybody, begging for somebody to take him or looking for suitors, but at least open to the idea. We got further confirmation on that weeks after the deadline from Ken Rosenthal on the Brewers being a team that really valued his power, and a deal didn't obviously reach the final stages, but there were legitimate conversations, not just, hey, we're interested in Pete. Okay, what are you offering? It sounded like names might have even been thrown around in that deal, and correct me if I'm wrong. And now a lot of reports circling that the Mets could very well look to trade Pete Alonso this winter. And I know a lot of people are sitting here, they might become nauseous at even that thought. Joe and I have talked about before, if you don't pay a player like Pete Alonso, who are you paying out of your homegrown players? And yes, there is a larger conversation, a more nuanced conversation here about he'll be 29 this winter. You are paying a first baseman. We don't know what Pete Alonso wants. I want to be very fair here and not just say, how have the Mets not extended this guy yet? Because me, and it sounds like nobody, because I haven't seen a single number thrown around in all of these stories. We don't know what Pete or his party wants, if he wants to still be a Met. Pete is always going to say the right thing publicly, which is great from Pete Alonso. But internally, I mean, Joe, we just went through it, right? Jacob deGrom left the first chance he got to go to the Texas Rangers. And good for deGrom if that's what he wanted. Best of luck. That is the luxury you are afforded when you are a superstar that makes it to free agency or waits it out until your free agency year. But I do find it interesting, Joe, without a president of baseball operations on this team right now that should have final say on these decisions, how much noise there is around the future of Pete Alonso not necessarily being with the New York Mets.
So we want to be careful about how much stock we're putting into rumors of what's going to happen in the off season in the month of August, because, you know, you mentioned the president of baseball operations, the elephant in the room, David Stearns, could very well be the Mets president of baseball operations. And in a hypothetical world that occurs, David Stearns has a lot of regret, and he's been open about it, about trading Josh Hader when he, in that trade deadline deal, when he was with Milwaukee. And would he really want his first stamp as president of baseball operations of the Mets to be trading Pete Alonso away for prospects? That's a question that I can't answer. He may be kind of cold-hearted to his core. I don't know David Stearns that well, obviously. So maybe he's that cold-hearted that he's just purely a value play. But in my eyes, Pete Alonso is basically irreplaceable. Most players can be replaced to some degree. You know how many power hitters have the power that Pete Alonso does in baseball? It's on less than this one hand. Like, he is one of a few that can do what Pete Alonso does. He may not be hitting for the average you want this year, and you figure that's going to take a step forward going forward, but he is a stone-cold lock for 40 home runs plus a year. He is a stone-cold lock to play almost every day. He gets hit in the wrist, gets a 3 to 4 week injury, is back in a week and a half. Like, this is a guy who wants to play baseball. I want to understand, why are these things coming out? Who is putting them out, and why is it getting out? Is this something that the Mets organization wants out there for one reason or another, which could be, you know, if you want to be a cynic, it could be trying to prep the fan base for something to come.
Right.
Or if you want to be on the other side of the coin, maybe it's a negotiation ploy for a contract. But I would really hate to play games with a franchise player like Pete, because we said this on previous weeks of the show. Pete Alonso is a guy that needs to set all of the Mets offensive records. He's a guy that needs to have 20 up in the rafters. Like, that's the type of player and franchise piece Pete Alonso is. He's made strides defensively at first. He's fine there. And you assume he's going to be fine there for at least a few more years. And sure, maybe he'll DH on the back end or whatever. But like you also said as well, Connor, we don't want to speculate on contracts. Like, sure, maybe Pete Alonso and his representation is telling the Mets hypothetically, you give us $300 million or we want to leave New York. And then the Mets go, well, then we got to trade you. We don't know what to tell you.
Or find the good luck.
Yeah,
go find that. Kind of the Jonathan Taylor Colts situation. In a much different way.
Exactly. But another thing too, it's okay if it goes to free agency. Like, in an ideal world, you're locking up Pete Alonso this offseason, and I believe the Mets intend to make an attempt to do that. I don't think, if there's one thing I would say about Steve Cohen and Billy Epler, largely they've been pretty forthright, I would say, with the fan base through the media. And Pete Alonso's name was in the season ticket person, the email that Steve Cohen had sent to season ticket holders, I should say. He talked about in his dugout press conference that he hopes Pete Alonso stays a Met long term. Billy Epler had mentioned him in the same breath as Brandon Nimmo and Francisco Lindor. So unless they're putting on this crazy front and they're getting ready to trade Alonso, it sounds like they want Pete to be on the 2024 Mets team. And another thing, too, they say they want to compete in 2024 to whatever degree that is. Lesser expectations than this year, which, fine, the Mets had the expectations of being a top 2 team in the sport this year. So are they going to be expected to be the 8th best, which is still a playoff team, but not the same expectations? That remains to be seen. But if you trade Pete Alonso, you significantly damper your chances at contending in 2024. There's no way around it. And there's no way to replace him. You're not signing like Rhys Hoskins or something off his ACL and saying, there's our new first baseman, because we got prospects for Pete Alonso. So obviously something my fanhood is coming out where I'm passionate about. Like, Pete Alonso should be a Met for life. And I don't see any reason why they should be heavily considering trading him unless it's some extreme contractual situation or he voices that, hey, I don't want to be a Met long term. I've enjoyed my time, but I want to go closer to Florida or whatever the case may be. But I wouldn't mind riding it out till free agency. If Aaron Judge can go to free agency, then Pete Alonso can go to free agency.
Right. And I think it's interesting, right? If Alonso wants to reset the first base market and the Mets know that, and once again, we don't know these things. We just know rumors and a lot of noise that the Mets could explore this during the winter. And I mean, this is the reality of this show. Joe and I talk to the passionate Met fan, and I think the passionate Met fan wants to know every scenario of how we got here or how we could get here with logic. And I think you look at the top paid first baseman in baseball, right? Joey Votto is on a 10-year deal that he signed at age, and this is really comparable. He signed it at age 28, where he makes $22.5 million a year for 10 years. Signed at age 28. Keep in mind, Alonso will be 29 this offseason. Matt Olson at age 27 with the Braves signed an 8-year deal where he makes $21 million a year. Freddie Freeman at age 32 signed a 6-year deal where he makes $27 million a year, right? So when you look at all those top 3 deals, you would think Alonso is going to be a guy that signs for really long term because he'll be 29 during the winter. He still is under a year of team control. So you're assuming this contract kicks in when his age 30 season starts. So assume that he wants at least an 8-year deal to take him to 38. I mean, he's probably a guy that wants the highest AAV, annual average, amongst first basemen in baseball. And the only thing I can say is, because I have no idea if the Mets are interested in giving him that yet or interested in resetting the market for him, or if that's where Pete is going to hold his ground. What I do know is, Joe, the Mets, and you can't say this about a lot of franchises in sports, for the Mets, they can do whatever they want when it comes to the money. There is nothing the Mets can't do. And you'll see it this offseason when they at least kick the tires on signing Shohei Ohtani. Now, that contract looks a lot different now, unfortunately, due to the UCL tear in Ohtani's elbow. And a lot of people around baseball don't think Ohtani's interested in coming out east. We don't know. We'll see. But if the Mets want to make a play for Ohtani, they have the financial, flexibility and power, which is more important, I think, in this instance, to do it. They'll probably be very interested in adding another pitcher from overseas in Yamamoto, who's younger, talented, and will be paid more than Kodai Senga. The overall thesis here, the overall point I am making is if the Mets believe Pete Alonso should reset the market at first base and they reward him also because he's a homegrown talent that they love, they have the financial power to easily do that. And if they don't, it'll be a very interesting scenario to see it play out of what their pivot is to tailor this roster. Because like you said, Joe, he is such an impactful player for an offense that truthfully doesn't have a lot of impactful talent. Francisco Lindor has been amazing this year. I like Brandon Nimmo, but it's always the same story with Brandon Nimmo. When he is aching from something, he is not an effective player, but he's been good. Brandon Nimmo is a solid player. There's nothing wrong with Brandon Nimmo. He's an ideal player at the top of the lineup. But after that, I mean, McNeil's had a down year. Marte's been hurt and is not getting any younger. You just look at this lineup right now. We hope Alvarez makes this monster jump and is a 30 home run guy next year, but the kid is 21 years old. So it just goes to show you, moving on from Alonso, it would be a pretty clear call of what 2024 would look like, depending on what other moves they make. And We don't have to have the entire conversation today. It's impossible to do so.
We have months. We have
a lot of
but,
time, but it'll be interesting to see how they value him, how Pete values being a Met, and ultimately where they land. And don't forget, folks, neither side has to do anything. Pete Alonso, like you highlighted, Joe, this is a very realistic scenario. Goes into the year without a contract, plays until his free agency, and we see what happens from there. Because the Mets are a team that can allow guys to go to free agency. I'm sure they wouldn't love that all the time, but to say, go get what you think you can get and come back to us and we could top it if we think you actually make it to that kind of contract from another team. So
that's what happened with Brandon Nimmo, right? Like,
yeah, that's it. We just went through this.
Yeah, and we wrote his Mets eulogy on this show pretty much, saying that we didn't think Brandon Nimmo was going to be back, and it worked out. He came back. So yeah, that's the one thing that I would say. Obviously, that's even a year from now. But even if the Mets don't sign Alonso this offseason or in the spring he plays it out, I wouldn't necessarily write his Mets eulogy for 2025 just because he saw free agency. Because like you said, Connor, if he goes out and he gets $28 million a year offered to him and he says to the Mets, I'll sign for 30, Steve Cohen could say, okay. Like he can do that. So that's a good place to be.
All right, let's go down on the farm. Enough of the financials in the big league club. Obviously, everybody that listens to this pod knows that this is kind of the time of the show that Joe and I get more excited, ironically, than anything. The future. It's just yelling future into the void is what we're doing here. But in all seriousness, this is a farm system worth watching more than it ever has been or in recent memory right now. And as we will always do, Joe, we'll start at the top with Syracuse. Ronny Mauricio is still down there. Brett Baty's still down there. We expect to see at least Baty before the season ends, maybe Mauricio as well. But have either of those guys, kind of stuck out to you as they ride it out in Syracuse? Or is this kind of a situation where they might have just plateaued there and what they do at the big league level ultimately determines, how we view each of them right now?
Ronny Mauricio's drawn 11 walks in the month of August, so that's a good thing.
That's big for Ronny.
He's played 22 games and 11 walks. So that's, average of a walk every other game. That is definitely big for Ronny's development. Brett Baty's just hitting AAA pitching, which is what Brett Baty will do. He's going to hit AAA pitching. So I think largely you got to get these two kids up here. September 1st is right around the corner. And after September 1st, rosters expand by a couple spots and you can have 28 guys. I figure Brett Baty is very likely to be one of those call-ups. And if Ronny Mauricio is not one of those call-ups, I would be a little confused as to what they are thinking with Mauricio long-term. Because if you're not willing to look at him now, when are you going to look at him? You might just never want to. Do you not want to potentially have him come up and have some struggles and that impact trade value? There's a lot of questions, but I still believe ultimately we will see Ronny Mauricio get a look in September. And it'll be fun to have kind of the full core of baby Mets and add Mauricio to that picture with Vientos and Alvarez and Baty. And hopefully in September, we're getting a look at those guys because I think Mauricio's earned it. He's done what he needs to do at the AAA level to at least get a look at the big league team, because it's all about evaluating 2024. And no disrespect to the guys that are in the lineup every day that are unlikely to be 2024 core pieces. It'd be good to get a look at the young guys.
So that takes us to Binghamton, the AA affiliate of the Mets, where Drew Gilbert and Luisangel Acuna, it feels like they are kind of must-see TV every night. And Joe, big news at the top of the week. They will be joined by one of the Mets' top prospects in Kevin Parada, who has been on this show, went on a hot streak after this show. But we also know, Joe, that injury has set back his season at times this summer.
Yeah, he sprained his ankle, basically going first to third on a play, rolled his ankle, and was out for 3 weeks, I think, something like that. He was out for a few weeks with that ankle injury. And I have it on good authority that he was going to be called up to AA any day around when he got hurt. So that setback, obviously, he rehabbed with St. Lucie and went back to Brooklyn for like a week plus. And now he's just getting called up to Double-A. He was hitting very well before the injury. He had the post Mets pod pump that he was able to hit. And yeah, exactly.
We'll get to another one of those in a minute, by the way.
For sure. But Parada, certainly is someone who warrants being at the Double-A level. And now you can throw him in a lineup with Acuna and Gilbert, and that makes it a pretty fun prospect lineup. And Gilbert keeps hitting. Not a surprise. He's been fantastic. He's probably been the best of the players the Mets acquired at the trade deadline since joining the organization. Acuna is hitting over 400 over the last week, so he seems to be catching his stride a little bit. The one thing I'd like to see from him, extra base hits. Like, I know home runs are not going to be a big part of his game, but he's not hitting doubles or triples much. It's singles and stealing bases, which is nice. But we want to see Luisangel Acuna tap into some of that gap power that he does have in there. But ultimately, we're still within 30 games of these guys being in the Mets organization. So not going too crazy about the numbers, but I still feel great about both these guys. And when we are evaluating this offseason, you look at both of them as guys that we figure will probably start in Syracuse. So they're getting closer to big league ready.
So that takes us down to Brooklyn, where Ryan Clifford, the other part of the Justin Verlander trade, is there. And we'll talk Clifford during our scoreboard review as well. And Jett Williams. So you want to talk about the Mets pod pump on a show right now. I mean, the situation for Jett Williams at this point, Joe, I don't know if Jett Williams just doesn't like Brooklyn and he's trying to get out of there as fast as possible. And I say that in the most joking way, because in 24 games in Brooklyn, this man has an OPS over 1,000. He's getting on base practically half the time. He's batting .326. He was batting .249 in St. Lucie. The OBP was always great for Jett, but the batting average was, just a little below what you'd like to see. He's hit 5 home runs already in those 24 games. He's stolen 9 bases. I mean, the kid has just arrived at Brooklyn, Joe, and looks like every bit of a superstar at that level right now.
I'll tell you, he's exceeded my expectations. And I don't know if, I guess, except for Kylie McDaniel now, who ranked him #1 in the Mets system and inside his top 50 prospects in the sport. I don't know if there's someone who was higher on Jett Williams than me, dating back to when the Mets drafted him. And even I didn't expect him to take to Brooklyn the way he has. And I mean, it's just a fantastic thing to see. It's the bat to ball skills are coming to life. In last year's draft, when the Mets drafted him, the only high school player in the class that, talking to scouts and evaluators, the only one in the high school class that had better pure bat to ball skills than Jett Williams was Termarr Johnson, who went 6th, something like that, to wherever the Pirates picked. He went to the Pirates
very early.
And Jett was only behind him, and that, like, he had better pure bat to ball skills than Drew Jones, than Elijah Green. Like, at the time, that's what was said. So now that's finally coming to fruition. And the eye hasn't gone anywhere, so he hasn't sacrificed drawing walks and working counts for trying to put the ball in play. But now he's putting the ball in play, and not just putting the ball in play, he's hitting with authority. I mean, there's north of 100-mile-an-hour exit velocities. He's a lot of line drives, a lot of fly balls. He's tapping into some power that even I jokingly said it's not going to be a huge part of his game, and he just keeps hitting home runs. So Jett Williams has been a heck of a story. And if you wanted to rank him #1 in the Mets system, I wouldn't fault you for it. He has a chance to be an absolute impact player that I will say I probably am off on his major league ETA if we're going, obviously he's a long way away from that. He's still not even in the upper minors, but he may start 2024 in Double-A, whereas I think my latest update for SNY, I had him pegged for a 2026 big league debut. Maybe I was a little too passive on that one. Jett Williams has been everything advertised.
And Termarr Johnson, he was taken 4th overall that year in the draft, so even higher. And, in the same sample size at high A that Jets had, because they both had a little over 20 games. He's hitting 197. So Jett is just, I mean, he's looking like a total star from that class. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves because it's tough expectations on a 19-year-old. But
for sure,
as we always say, Joe, you'd much rather see it this way than the other way. So it's a reminder, you're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your shows. Let's get into the scoreboard from last week. A quick review before we make some predictions, because we got to solve a tight race to close out this season. Over-under push was set at 1 for DJ Stewart home runs in the next 6 games. Joe, you said under. You didn't believe in DJ Stewart. Sad. You hate to see it. I gave a push. 1 home run. He hit 1 home run. I get the point. Over-under push
last day, too.
Yeah, oh yeah, don't count the same. Over-under push set at 2 for Pete Alonso home runs in the next 6 games. Joe, you said push. I said over. Pete didn't hit a home run. No points awarded. Over-under push was, it didn't help that he got hit in the back of the neck/head, by the way. Over-under push was set at 1 for Francisco Lindor stolen bases in the next 6 games. Joe, you went over. I went with the push. I don't know why I did that in hindsight. And Joe, you obviously get the point. Lindor stole 2 bases. Over-under push was set at 6 for Jeff McNeil hits in the next 6 games. We both went over. Jeff had 5. No points awarded for either. Over-under push set at 2. Luisangel Acuna stolen bases in the next 6 Binghamton games. They only ended up playing 5. He only had 2. We both went over. No points awarded.
By the way, he got those 2 in the first game of the week. So I remember texting our text with our producer Jeff on last Tuesday night or whatever.
This will be easy.
He had 2 stolen bases. Yeah.
So. All right, then we did Jett Williams walks in the next 6 Cyclones games. Over-under push was set at 4. Joe, you went with the push at 4. I went with under. Jett had 6 walks. No points awarded. He's not only hitting home runs and getting hits and getting extra base hits, but he's also still walking. Last one was over-under 1, Ryan Clifford home run in the next 6 Cyclones games. Joe, you pushed at 1. I went over and won by a hair. Clifford hit 2 home runs in this past week. Good for Clifford to get that power back going. 2 points for me, 1 point for Joe. I lead the season series 18-17, which brings us to this week as we are right down to the wire. And once again, I always remind people, like, if you're listening along and you like this segment, you know, I always picture people like saying in their head which side they would go on, maybe even write it down. So you probably do better than Joe and I in a week at this rate. Joe and I scratch together a point or 2 each week. Our first one, the over-under push is set at 2 for Pete Alonso home runs in the next 5 Mets games. Joe, you have the floor.
I will go back to a push. I think Alonso hits a couple. I don't really have much of a logic. Pete Alonso can hit home runs, so I'll say he hits 2.
I'll go under. I think 1 for Pete Alonso, so I will take the under. I also like having a little bit more flexibility there than being stuck on the push. The next one, over-under push at 3 for Rafael Ortega hits in the next 5 Mets games. Man, that is not a lot of hits, but this is a man that seems to bat right at the bottom of the order every single time here, Joe. Oh, God, this is brutal. I'm going to take the push. I know it seems pretty risky there, but I'm going to go for 3 hits for Ortega.
Rafael Ortega have a walk-off, make it onto the scoreboard. Did I say score? Yeah, scoreboard, not scorecard. What is it?
It's the scoreboard.
Yeah, scoreboard.
We're almost done with the game.
Yeah. And I still haven't figured out the name. No. Anyway, on the scoreboard, I will go under for Rafael Ortega. I'll say 1 or 2 hits, and yeah, that's it.
All right, the next one, over-under push is set at 2 for Luisangel Acuna stolen bases in the next 6 Binghamton games, Joe.
I will hit the over again. He should have had more than 2 last week. He hit over 400 during the week. He had 2 stolen bases in the first game of the week. So I'll go over, and he's still trying to keep pace with Ronald.
Yeah, I'm going to go over as well. I think it was kind of a fluky week that he only had that many, honestly. And I think he's somebody that, more importantly, you highlighted, Joe, is now getting on base a lot, and he gets on first base a lot. And when Acuna gets on first base, he's a guy that's simply going to run. So that brings us to our next minor league category. Drew Gilbert hits in the next 6 Binghamton games is set at 6 for the over-under push. Gilbert is batting .338 in Binghamton in 20 games for the Mets. He's getting on base at a .395 on base percentage there. 6 is a lot, although I guess in the minors it's not that much. Man, I'm going to say the over for Gilbert here, Joe. I'll say Gilbert's bat stays hot and he continues to get on base a lot by hitting the ball, not just walks. What do you think?
I'll go push. I think Drew Gilbert looks great, but 6 hits over the next 6 games. Go 1 for 3 each game. That's about a 333 average, which is kind of what he's doing. So I'll go push.
All right, over under push. Our last one is 6 Jett Williams walks in the next 6 Cyclones games.
Me first or you first?
You first.
Me first. Okay. I will say I'll go push. I'll go push here. I think Jett is still on his walk game. He's not giving it up as he showed last week. So I'll push and say he gets 6, 1 a game on average.
All right. I'll take the under for Jett. I tried it last week. It didn't work. I'll try it again. Reminder, I'm up on the season 18-17. It's a nail biter as the scoreboard will come to a close in the next couple weeks. Let's close out with a mailbag question here, Joe. We answered a lot of them, honestly, throughout the pod. A lot of conversation around Pete Alonso and will Jett Williams be your number 1 prospect and things along the lines of that. But we can always count on Steve Miller to come up with one that is in the weeds, well thought out, a scenario here from Steve Miller. He said, Cleveland had been rumored to be open to trading Shane Bieber at the deadline. Would an offseason trade make sense for the Mets if they get Bieber and send Mauricio and Megill in return? Would that be enough? 2 years of control left for Bieber.
It doesn't feel like enough, to be honest with you, but Bieber's hurt. What was his injury? I don't have him in fantasy baseball, so I'm not entirely sure, but I know that Bieber was injured. So, but on the surface, 2 years of service time on a guy like Shane Bieber, as much as I like Ronny Mauricio and I think Tylor Megill has shown some things, that feels like a package that could probably be relatively easily topped in the market if they were to put a healthy Shane Bieber out there. But I like the thought process because we so often focus on free agency, and it's Yoshinobu Yamamoto, it's Julio Urias, it's Aaron Nola, it's Jordan Montgomery, it's guys like that are always get our focus. And the reason that is because we can Google free agent lists and we know who is going to likely be out there, because unlike other sports in baseball, if you haven't signed an extension by now, you're going to free agency. Basically, that's how it works. But there's going to be a trade market too, and the Mets need multiple pitchers, both in the rotation and in the bullpen. And if Shane Bieber's made available, certainly I would not be opposed to making that call to see what the cost is. But you have to investigate both sides of this. It's trade, it's free agency. And part of the benefit of the way the Mets handled the trade deadline in juicing up their farm system with prospects is it gives them more latitude to trade from that prospect pool if the right player becomes available. So good thought. Don't know if it's enough for Bieber specifically, but it's something to keep in the back of our minds here that the trade market is a thing too. We just don't know who's on it yet, and we'll find out obviously in the coming months.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, this is a great player who has dealt with injury 2 of the last 3 seasons, right, Joe? I mean, obviously 2022, he pitches a sub-3 ERA, makes it to 200 innings for the second time in his career. He doesn't strike out a ton of guys anymore, which is very odd to me.
He doesn't throw as hard as he used to.
Yeah, in 2020, and I know it was a shortened season, but 14.2 over 9, 2021, 12.5 over 9. And now he's a guy that, I mean, he strikes out about 7 to 8 batters over 9. So, but it's still a very effective player. But the injury risk is real. I mean, 2021, he basically didn't pitch the whole summer because of a strain. He was, put on the injured list in June 14th. He didn't come back until September 24th. That's a lot of time he missed in 2021. This year on July 15th, he was put on the IL with elbow inflammation and very quickly transferred to the 60-day IL. So that's severe. Right. That's for that. Elbow stuff is scary, but
elbow's
scary for a 28-year-old. Yeah.
The overall premise is there though, that we need to also think about the trade market as we move forward here.
Well, I think Steve Miller is on the right track is the point of looking at a high octane pitcher playing for a franchise that rarely ever pays these guys. They trade them before their prime is over, but right before their prime is over. One of them plays for the Mets right now. And they typically are a year or two away from that free agency period. And it's not, this isn't right, Joe. This isn't a conversation about Shane Bieber. This is a conversation about a number one, number two pitcher for the front of the system. What is the cost and how do you do it? And where do you look for it? And I like that your overall point in this conversation is the Mets have completed step one. And step one is having depth in your farm system at all three levels of the farm system, that when these trades come up, you can send 3 prospects that way and not lose your entire system. You still have guys that can contribute to your big league club in the next year or two. So it's the right idea. We'll have, like, honestly, it feels like we'll have 6 of those scenarios this winter that we'll keep an eye on, along with Yamamoto, who we will talk about almost every week at this point. With the yo-yo curveball, right? Am I on the right track there with him?
You're on the, yeah.
It's a lot of fun ahead to figure out what this rotation looks like. And I know some people listening to that, are probably frustrated because this year's rotation was supposed to be great and it didn't work with a lot of older guys. But what we've seen from Senga, what we've seen in large part from Quintana, if the Mets go out and get 2 pretty good pitchers this offseason, they are going to be competitive in 2024, despite them being kind of written off thanks to Max Scherzer running to do to help with a long-winded piece of journalism as soon as he was traded. And Joe, speaking of the rotation, Ken Rosenthal said per sources that Carlos Carrasco has been put on waivers by the Mets, which is, I guess, not shocking. It feels like one of those scenarios where it would be a little bit of a surprise if a team puts in a claim for Cookie. Obviously, not only due to the financials, but the fact that he hasn't been very effective, notably in the second half of the season. Do you think teams look for pitching, even if it's obviously out of the bullpen on this stretch run? Do you think there's any shot that somebody puts in a claim on Carrasco?
I can't imagine a claim because, like you said, Connor, you're picking up the remainder of the salary. I mean, it's the prorated month of 14 million. So who knows? Maybe there's a team that teams. Yeah, it's still a lot, but some teams might have whatever that number is. I'm not a math guy, but whatever that number is, they might still have that in their budget that they can pull it off. But I imagine Carrasco's the type of guy that probably clears waivers and signs somewhere on a minor league deal or something like that. Maybe makes a minor league start or so, and then gets added to the roster, and that's that. But obviously, a difficult end for Cookie Carrasco, his Mets tenure, because obviously he's a fantastic person that's been through so much in his life and was a very good pitcher for the Mets in 2022. So I know 2023 has gone poorly, but I don't think we should look back at his Mets tenure as he was nothing for the Mets. And now the question becomes, how do you fill that spot in the rotation? Joey Lucchesi has pitched in the minor leagues. That seemingly is a fit. And if you really want to think about it, Mike Vasil has only given up 5 earned runs in his last 24 innings or so pitched. So do they consider giving a look to Mike Vasil in September? I don't think that should be considered outside of the realm of possibility. But now the question is going to be, how do they replace Carrasco's spot? Not as far as production goes, because like you said, Connor, not really producing much, certainly of late, but what pitcher do they choose to just insert into that slot and have pitch every 5th day over the last month of the season here? Joe,
closing thoughts for today's episode of the Mets Pod.
See how they play this week. I'm back in on getting that their draft pick. So not rooting for losses per se, but if losses happen to find the Mets, I'm not going to get mad anymore. It is that stretch from Atlanta to LA was kind of my personal last gasp of, okay, if they take 2 out of 3 from Atlanta, take 2 out of 3 from the Angels, get themselves kind of closer and closer to that wild card. At this point, I'm obviously fully looking forward to 2024. So, yeah, we'll see how the next few days go. And I definitely want to see continued growth from David Peterson and Tylor Megill, because those were 2 good starts, one from each of them. But you need to stack those on each other here over the next month, instead of just, it can't be Peterson had that one good start and the next time out he goes 3 2/3 and allows 4 runs and throws 90 pitches or something. Like, let's start to stack these on each other so that way you can really evaluate them for 24.
Right. Go into spring training with a lot of confidence. And what the you never have the assumption that you're going to be handed or given a roadway to the 5th starting spot. But can you come in, turn some heads, surprise, and earn it? Absolutely. I mean, this podcast will never quit David Peterson. That much we know. So I think we might have finally quit Drew Smith. Sorry, Drew. We really carried that flag for a long time, but we're still carrying the flag for David Peterson. This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. This summer, step out of the office and into the iconic with Cadillac, where the Made to Move sales event provides all the inspiration needed to set your email status to away. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac showroom for the Made to Move sales event today. Remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll catch you next week.